Now, after these introduction sentences, I would like to go to the first lesson session. And the title is The History of Demography. What are the population dynamics in the 20th and the 21st century? Before I will give these information and definitions, I think it's important that we have clarity what demography is about. Demography is a research discipline investigating the structure and dynamics of populations. And this research discipline has about 3 key drivers. Number 1, these are the birth rates. Number 2 is the mortality rates, or how long do we live? And number 3 is migration, or how do we move about our countries, our continents, and the combination of these 3 elements will determine how demography will look, or they shape the picture of demography. As you already can imagine, demography is not a static process. Demography is dynamic, and demography is always about change. And demography describes these changes in population, size, and structure caused by birth rates, death rates, and by migration. These phenomenon, demographic change, has always, for many thousands of years, existed. It was always a process of population development. But the big change now is the speed, or the extent of demographic change we see today. And for one of the first times in our history, the ongoing changes will have drastic adjustments in the way we live, work, or want to live. And this has an impact on our societies, on us as individuals, our businesses, and the policy frameworks in which we live. You can imagine demography is not a small thing. Demography is one of the mega trends which shape us yesterday, which shape us today, which shape us in the future. It's a mega trend like globalization, urbanization, climate, or resources. And demography is driven by 3 elements, as I've already said. Longevity, which has a huge impact on aging. Fertility, which has a huge impact on the size of our population. And migration, which is quite unpredictable, which has a huge impact on the structure and changes of our societies. And in the coming sections, I will go in a little bit more detail in these elements. Now, let's have a look at our history in the past 600 years. And what you see here is population size of the continents, and you can easily depict there is diversity in quantity and as well, to some extent, dynamics. If you look more in detail, since the end of the 19th century, we have a huge increase in populations sizes, which started everywhere except in Africa, but it was most prominent in Asia, and as well to some extent, but a lower level in Europe. And then you can also see that it picked up population growth in Africa in the 20th century. What you can also see that this picture of population growth will change significantly in the 21st century, where Asia will start to shrink, where Europe is already about to shrink, and Africa will increase in size significantly and in an unprecedented way. This is the picture. This is the environment in terms of population size we are living in the 21st century. And this is the basis of our future in society, in business, and political frameworks. This change in population sizes is as well or founded by the history of our life expectancy, because as the longevity we live is a key driver as well, besides fertility and migration, of population sizes and population compositions. As you can see here, the life expectancy of human beings has been quite stable for thousands of years. And the big change came with the 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution, with progress in the way we live, and the way we could live, and the way we actually live. Starting with an average life expectancy of 24 years, which we had for thousands of years, we had dynamics, and life expectancy increased from 24 years, which we had for thousands of years, till 2022, on average, 72 years, which is the global average. And this increase from 24 years to 72 years happened in around about 200 years all around the world, with different quality and speed. If you look more in detail on these longevity dynamics, as I already said, longevity happened all around the world. It happened on all continents. And what you see here is the dynamics in comparison of longevity increases since 1900. The picture is longevity is most advanced in the rich developed countries like the US, Europe, and Oceania, with pick up of Asia, and the follower, but they will reach longevity as well sooner or later, Africa. So the trend all around the world is increase in longevity, however, from a different starting point, and as well currently with different level of longevity achievements. But the direction is everywhere in the same. Longevity is going up. To give you a little bit more detail in the gains in life expectancy which have been reached in the past 10 years, which means since 2012, I give you some few examples of the 160 countries we have on our planet. The messages on this slide are, number one, even in those countries where longevity is most advanced, like, for example, Japan, Switzerland, or the UK, longevity is going on and gains are achieved. On the other hand, you have African countries, for example, where longevity is still on a lower level. But we would see here the gains, the current gains, or the gains in the past 10 years, were in most African countries much higher than in the developed countries. And some countries gained in 10 years life expectancy increases, like in Tanzania, of 4.7 years within 10 years. This is as well unprecedented. And the key explanation is that they made huge improvements in their public health, where in the Western world, they made huge or ongoing improvements for the health of elderlies. So I shared with you the ongoing prospect of longer lives. And the key question now is, what drives longer lives? So if you're at the age of 50, you have the choice to live a healthy life or a non-healthy life. And if you live a healthy life, you will have another 40 years of good life. And if you have an unhealthy life, you will have only another life of 20 years, which is remaining. The key message from this study depicted on this slide is that 70% of your life expectancy at the age of 50 is determined by the way you live. And the way you live is defined: do you smoke, yes or no? What is your body weight? How physical active are you? How much do you drink? And do you manage to have a good diet? The result, the reward of such a behavior will be that you have at least 15 to 20 more years compared to living in an unhealthy life. Another driver of population size across the world is fertility rates. And what you see here in different colors is a description of the fertility rates around the planet. The blue countries, the blue continents, and the darker blue they are, depict that fertility is very low, and all the other countries which have different colors like yellow, red, or green depict that fertility rates are higher than you need to maintain a population stable. And it's easily to be recognized. The only continent where you have persistently very high fertility rates remains to be Africa, where you still have fertility rates on average of about 4.5, whereas in the remaining developing world, including China, fertility rates are below 2.1. That means that with such a fertility rate in the long run, if nothing else changes, populations will decline. Let me give you a very detailed analysis in the fertility rates of selected country in 2022. What you again can see that in the developed countries like the US, UK, Japan, Switzerland, or South Korea, the fertility rates are very, very low. They are below 2.1, which means they are below replacement level, which means if nothing changes, these countries will shrink. On the other hand, totally different picture emerges for the African countries, in this case, countries in the East African community, where you have still fertility rates of 6.1 up to 3.3 in Kenya. And this means these regions will significantly grow in size because of the high fertility rates. And the final driver of demographic change is migration. And what I would like to depict on this slide is what are the principal patterns of migration, of moving across borders, across country borders, across the entire world. What you see that Latin America, Africa, and Asia, these are the regions where people live. And where do they move? They move to the richer areas, which are North America, Europe, and Oceania. The only difference with these patterns is that they change over time, they change in quantity, and they change with preference where people move to. But this is the pattern, and this pattern is mainly driven, and I will go there in detail once more in a minute, by differences in prosperity, by differences in future, or by differences to make a better life. After having given you these introductions in the principles of demography, longevity, migration, and fertility, I will give you some summarizing data about the future picture of our planet by continent. What you can easily see on this slide, and it refers for the entire populations, that in the 21st century, Africa will be the continent where the most significant population growth will happen. Maybe surprisingly, you will recognize that Asia will start to grow in population size and will start to shrink from 2050 on. And then you will see the other continents where the populations are much smaller. And you will see as well, for example, that Europe will be a shrinking continent, and the US as an economic power will be a continent that continues to grow on a very low level. Since the purpose and the objective of this session is more information on aging, on longevity, let's have a more detailed look on elderly populations around the world. And again, you see that you will have huge increases in aging populations in Asia. You will see that aging will come in Africa not until 2050 in a real significant way. You will see that Europe is continue to age, but in terms of aging will reach a plateau when you look at the group of 65 to 79-year population by 2050. And as well, America will continue to increase to have aging populations. But to summarize, the huge momentum in aging will happen in the next 20 to 30 years in Asia. Now let's have a closer look at the advanced aging populations, the so-called 80+ populations. Again, you will see Europe will become even older. The 80+ population will continue to grow even for the rest of this century. And again, you will see the huge increase in elderly people in Asia. And this is mainly driven by countries like India or China predominantly. And again, the pattern for Africa, aging or advanced aging will not be a real issue until the end of this century. And now for curiosity, let's have a look how many centenarians you will have around the world. By the end of this century, you will have in Europe about 2 million people who are centenarians. At the end of this century, you will have, by contrast, 11 million centenarians in Asia, which is the size of the Netherlands. And you will also see that the number of centenarians will increase everywhere, as well in the US. They as well will have, just as Europe, about 2 million. And in Latin America, there will be as well 3 million centenarians by the end of this century. And if you add up the sum, you will have, by the end of the century, about 20 million people who are centenarians, which is the size of the Netherlands. Demography and its ongoing dynamics, and I've described them to you, will not go away. They are simply there and they will continue. Humans live longer all across the world, and better health continues to be the key drivers. The trend towards longer lifespans is ongoing, and however, it will have different dynamics. And you saw the key difference, for example, between Africa Asia and Europe or Americas. In terms of quantities, population growth in the 20th century was driven by Asian countries. The key message today from this session is the sub-Saharan African countries are the origin of population growth in the 21st century with all its consequences. Thank you for joining and see you soon in lesson 2.